Imagine this: a silent courtroom, a routine parking violation, a morning where no one expects anything unusual. And then a 19-year-old girl places a tarot deck on the bench as if she is about to deliver the verdict. It was one of those typical Providence mornings when the pace of justice felt almost domestic. Elderly folks in line with parking tickets from doctor visits, a few weary delivery drivers explaining late permits, clerks stamping papers with absent-minded rhythm. Cameras from the local station hummed quietly in the corner, recording another predictable docket. No one even bothered lifting their eyes until the bailiff called Lena Marquez, 19 years old. Something shifted. A ripple of interest crossed the room. The clerks paused mid-stamp, and the judge glanced toward the aisle just as she entered. She moved too fast, too sure of herself for someone barely out of high school. In her hands, no folders, no paperwork, only a slim wooden box held tight against her chest. When she reached the podium, she ran her fingers lightly along its edge, almost testing the grain like someone checking the temperature of water before stepping in. The gesture was subtle, but it felt out of place, deliberate. A few people exchanged puzzled glances. Then came the first jolt. The bailiff asked her to swear in, and she shook her head. "I don't swear on the Bible," she said calmly. "My truth is in the cards." The room stirred, soft whispers, an uneasy breath here and there. Even the cameraman straightened, sensing a moment worth filming. Her case was technically simple: a late parking fine, ignored notices, a vehicle recorded in a restricted emergency zone. Yet when she lifted her head to address Judge Caprio, her first words had nothing to do with any of that. "I know why I'm really here," she said, "and you know it too." For a heartbeat, even the judge paused. One eyebrow rose, the smallest movement, but enough for everyone to feel the air tighten. And then she opened the wooden box. With a single, practiced motion, she drew a card and placed it face down on the bench between them. Her hand hovered for a second before she flipped it over. The tower, a symbol of upheaval, collapse, sudden destruction. Someone gasped. A woman near the door covered her mouth. The reporters aimed their lenses directly at the card as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. The girl didn't flinch, her steady, unwavering stare fixed on the judge, as though she were waiting for the world to tilt. Judge Caprio, behind decades of patience, didn't show more than a faint tightening at the corner of his lips, but inside, a dry, private thought passed through him. Of all days. "I get the amateur profit." Still, he said nothing. The courtroom itself felt like it held its breath. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. Her confidence wasn't the loud, reckless kind. More like a thin wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Every movement she made was quick, precise, almost rehearsed. This wasn't just a teenager contesting a ticket. This was someone staging a confrontation. And the card, bold, ominous, sat between them like a threat no one could yet decipher. She stood there gripping the podium, chin held high, but the judge could already sense something beneath the surface. She wasn't simply defiant. She was carrying the kind of tension that doesn't come from a parking ticket. It comes from life pressing too hard, too early. Lena Marquez grew up in the kind of Providence neighborhood where people learned to fend for themselves long before adulthood. Her mother worked night shifts at the city hospital, shuttling between rooms filled with patients and fluorescent light. Her father had drifted away years earlier, leaving nothing behind except a surname on old paperwork. There was no inheritance of certainty in her life, only long bus rides, crowded apartments, and an ache to belong to something. Kids in her area didn't join sports leagues or after-school clubs. They joined online worlds, spiritual influencers on TikTok, energy mentors, tarot tutorials promising clarity when life offered none. Some found comfort there, others found identity. Lena found a language for her frustration. The parking fine at the center of today's case was laughably small. Her mother had been too exhausted to drive safely after a shift, so Lena had pulled into an emergency zone for less than 3 minutes to pick her up. The ticket itself wasn't the problem. What followed was 3 notices were sent, all ignored, but not by accident. I didn't open them, she admitted suddenly, eyes still on the judge. I already knew what they were going to say. Her tone wasn't proud, more resigned, almost brittle. Judge Caprio leaned back, taking in her words. The courtroom remained still, curious. You ignored every notice because you believed the law is unfair? He asked quietly. She nodded. Unfair to people without money, unfair to people like us. That sentence carried more weight than her bold entry. It wasn't a performance. It was a bruise. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the wooden tarot box. The bravado she entered with had tiny cracks now, thin but visible. Then came another reveal, one that shifted the room again. I didn't come here just for the ticket, she said, voice tightening. I came because I've watched your videos. A murmur floated across the benches. She swallowed, cheeks warming under the courtroom lights. I wanted to make a statement. Something people would notice. It hit everyone at once. She wasn't here for justice. She wasn't even here for herself. She was here for an audience. Judge Caprio studied her with a softness he kept well hidden. Behind her fiery tone, he saw something unmistakable. A teenager carrying too many adult problems and disguising them as courage. He reached out and picked up the tarot card she'd dramatically placed moments earlier. The Tower. Chaos. Upheaval. He examined it briefly, then, without a single comment, returned it to her. A small gesture, but powerful. It stripped the room of theatrics. It dismissed the symbolism. It forced her to stand there as a person, not a performer. She blinked, unsure how to interpret his calm. For the first time since walking in, she exhaled. Long, uneven, almost relieved. Her mask hadn't fallen yet, but it was slipping. And everyone, including Lena herself, could feel it. The judge let the room settle before speaking again. His voice, usually warm with gentle humor, carried a firmer edge now. Lena, he said, why didn't your mother come with you today? The question hit her harder than anything he'd said so far. Color drained from her face. She gripped the podium with both hands, as if bracing against a sudden wind. She thinks I'm at school, she replied, barely above a whisper. And just like that, the courtroom understood the second layer of this story. Her mother wasn't absent out of neglect. She had been kept in the dark. The girl standing confidently before the cameras had, in reality, snuck into a courtroom to stage her rebellion. Someone in the back inhaled sharply. The judge didn't rush her. He let the silence stretch until she lifted her eyes again. You didn't tell her because you thought she'd be upset? He asked. No, she answered, because she's already one warning away from losing her shift. If she knew I was doing this, she gestured vaguely to the cameras, she'd panic. The trembling in her hands returned, stronger now. The teenage bravado that had filled the room minutes earlier evaporated, leaving behind a scared young woman trying desperately not to fall apart in front of strangers. Judge Caprio opened the folder in front of him and flipped through several pages. You received 3 notices about this fine, he said, but according to the file, none of them were opened. The words made her shoulders tense. She didn't answer. He continued, quiet but precise. Miss Marquez, people usually ignore 1 letter, sometimes 2, but 3 unopened envelopes? He looked directly at her. That tells me something else is going on. Her throat moved in a hard swallow. The truth emerged not in words, but in the eyes she tried so hard to keep steady. The judge gently tapped the address on the paperwork. "You don't live here anymore, do you?" Her breath caught. A woman in the front row murmured, "Oh, God." Finally, Lena nodded. "We were evicted last year," she said. "The letters went to the old place." The courtroom shifted from curiosity to quiet compassion. It wasn't pity, just a shared recognition of real struggle. But the moment of sympathy cracked something inside her. "I'm not weak," she snapped suddenly, wiping her face with quick, angry motions. "Everyone thinks kids are clueless, but we're not. We see how people like us get ignored. We see how everything falls apart the moment we slip." Her voice pitched upward, trying and failing to hold steady. "The system doesn't protect people who are already drowning. It just pushes them under and says it's their fault." A few jurors flinched at the rawness of her outburst. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He simply leaned forward and spoke with a clarity that cut straight through the noise. "Lena, I'm not here to judge your fear. I just want the truth." His calm disarmed her far more than any criticism would have. She looked at the tarot deck beside her hand. Those cards that moments earlier seemed powerful now looked strangely childish, almost embarrassing. She let out a shaky exhale, eyes lowering. "I didn't know what else to do," she murmured. The courtroom remained absolutely still, waiting for what came next. Her last words still hung in the air when Judge Caprio quietly lifted another sheet from the folder, one that hadn't been mentioned yet. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the printed lines, then looked back at her with a calm that made the room lean in. "Lena," he said softly, "there's something here you may not know." She straightened, wary, as if bracing for another blow. "This record shows you filed 2 formal complaints about your mother's car being towed," he continued. "Both were dismissed, not because they lacked merit, but because of an internal filing error." A startled hush rippled through the courtroom. Administrative mistakes weren't dramatic, but for anyone who'd ever dealt with city paperwork, the revelation felt painfully believable. Lena blinked rapidly. "They never told us that." "No," the judge answered. "They didn't." The paper in his hand trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of what it represented. A child thinking the world was against her, only to discover the system had stumbled, and she'd been caught in the fall. He folded the document neatly. "Tell me," he asked, "do you see me as an enemy, or simply the closest symbol to aim at?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her fingers closed tight around the tarot card she had reclaimed earlier, the card representing destruction, and it bent under the pressure of her grip. For the first time, she couldn't meet his eyes. The judge let the silence stretch, giving space for honesty to rise on its own. Then he spoke again, his tone more analytical now. "I reviewed the timestamp from the citation," he said. "The photograph of your vehicle was taken during a window when you were nowhere near the area." The reaction was immediate, an audible gasp, followed by stunned quiet. A man in the back leaned forward as if he hadn't heard correctly. Lena stared at him, bewildered. "What? That's impossible. I drove?" "No," the judge interrupted gently. "Your mother moved the car that morning. She was the driver, not you." A tremor passed through her, small but unmistakable. She wasn't responsible for the violation. She'd walked into court ready to battle a system she believed had targeted her, only to learn she had been fighting a ghost. Her breath broke unevenly as she pressed her palm to her forehead. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought—" Her voice collapsed. She tried to steady herself, but the truth had cut too cleanly. "I'm tired," she admitted. It feels like everything keeps slipping, and no one hears anything unless you yell." Her tone wasn't dramatic, just worn, painfully sincere. The courtroom didn't move, the judge didn't interrupt, and the tower card, once laid down like a warning, now sat between them as a quiet emblem of a life strained to its breaking point. Not a threat, but a confession. Judge Caprio placed the papers down with deliberate care, as though resetting the balance in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't rise above a calm conversational tone, yet it carried through the courtroom with unexpected weight. "Lena," he began, "you walked in here with cards to warn me about chaos. But what I want you to look at is far more ordinary. This overlooked document." He slid the corrected file toward her. "It proves something you argued from the start. Sometimes the system does fail people. And today, at least, it needed to acknowledge that." His words didn't flatter, didn't scold. They simply landed where they needed to. Lena's gaze softened, confusion and shame wrestling for space. It was the first time she looked truly young. "I shouldn't have come in here like some kind of messenger," she murmured. "I was angry, and I wanted someone to notice." She pressed her palms together tightly. "I thought if I acted bold enough, people online would pay attention." A ripple of surprise crossed the room. Not judgment, just recognition of a new kind of pressure adults her age faced. She inhaled shakily. "I filmed a video before coming here," she confessed. "I planned to post it after the hearing. Something dramatic. Something that would get views." Cameras in the courtroom remained steady, but the energy shifted. Her admission wasn't theatrical. It was raw, almost apologetic. Judge Caprio let a long pause settle before responding. His tone was steady, but the kindness beneath it was impossible to miss. "Lena," he said, "the world will always have people who applaud the loudest moment, not the truest one. But this is not a stage, and you are not material for someone scrolling." He leaned forward slightly. "In here, you're not a clip. You're a person with burdens far heavier than a fine." A few members of the audience swallowed hard. The sincerity in his voice struck deeper than any reprimand could. Then came his decision, measured, thoughtful, unmistakably firm. "As for the citation," he said, "I'm dismissing it entirely. You are not responsible for the violation." Her lips parted, stunned. "But," he continued, holding up a finger, "I'm adding one condition." The room waited. "I want you to spend a day at the city's social support center. Not as punishment, as perspective. You'll see people who are fighting battles larger than paperwork errors, and who still show up with dignity." It wasn't leniency. It wasn't discipline. It was guidance, quietly offered. Lena nodded almost immediately, not out of fear, but gratitude. Something in her posture changed. The defensive tension that shadowed her all morning faded, replaced by a small but unmistakable clarity. Around them, the audience exhaled in a single, warm breath. No applause, no murmurs, just a collective recognition of a moment where justice didn't come wrapped in severity, but in humanity. Lena lifted her tarot deck again, this time with no performance behind the gesture. She held it gently, as if realizing how small it was compared to everything else that had been laid bare. And for the first time since entering the courtroom, she seemed grounded. Not in rebellion, but in understanding. When the judge announced his decision, the tension that had gripped the room finally began to dissolve. Lena stepped back from the podium, gathering her tarot deck with a newfound gentleness. Gone was the swagger she'd arrived with. In its place was a calm, almost unfamiliar to her. She slipped the cards into their wooden box, closing it slowly, as if sealing away something she no longer needed as armor. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing evened out. She didn't look victorious. She looked relieved, quietly, cautiously relieved. As she turned toward the exit, Judge Caprio's voice stopped her. "Lena," he said, not sternly, not warmly, just steadily. "Cards don't reveal the future. They reveal the person holding them." The words drifted through the room like a soft echo, landing somewhere deep beneath the surface. She paused mid-step, her back still to him. For a few seconds, she didn't move. The courtroom waited in perfect stillness. Then she slowly turned around. In her hand was one more card, one she had kept hidden throughout the entire hearing. She walked back toward the bench with quiet, deliberate steps, each one lighter than the last. When she reached the podium, she didn't look at the cameras or the crowd. She looked only at the judge. "This one," she said softly. "This one always felt out of place with the others." She placed it gently on the bench. The sun, bright, clear, uncomplicated. A symbol not of prophecy, but of possibility. Maybe it was the contrast with the tower card from earlier, or maybe it was the tremor of sincerity in her voice. But the moment carried a weight no showmanship could manufacture. "Maybe, someday," she whispered. Not a promise, not a prediction, just an opening. Then she stepped back, nodded once, and finally walked toward the doors. The audience didn't clap. They didn't shift in their seats. They simply watched her go, as if afraid any sound might break the fragile hope she'd left behind. A local news cameraman briefly panned to Judge Caprio. His expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't amused. It was the gentle, reflective look of someone who had just witnessed a young life bend, not break, toward something steadier. Later that week, the moment spread across social media in a way no spectacle could have engineered. Not because of drama, not because of the tarot, but because older viewers, people who had weathered layoffs, medical bills, bureaucratic errors, and the loneliness of modern life, felt something familiar in the girl's struggle. Dozens of comments from adults 50 and older appeared under the clip. Someone finally showed these kids that compassion works better than fear. She needed guidance, not punishment. That judge taught her more in 10 minutes than any influencer ever could. The video wasn't viral for the reasons she expected when she first filmed her stunt. It resonated because for one brief hour in a municipal courtroom, two generations met in the middle, one searching for direction, the other offering it quietly without spectacle. And somewhere in a worn apartment on the west side of Providence, a wooden tarot box now held one card on top. The sun, waiting for its meaning to be decided by the life still unfolding.